Hello, everybody, and welcome. I know that there's still a few people that are joining us right now, but in the interest of time, I think we're going to get started. So it's wonderful to have you all with us today. Obviously, this is a bit of a different format for us. It's our first digital event. So thank you so much for everyone for being here with us. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rhiannon Rosalind. Most of you know me as the CEO of the Economic Club of Canada, but I'm also the co-founder and CEO of another platform called the Global Institute for Conscious Economics. And today, the Global Institute for Conscious Economics is the host platform that we are having this conversation on. What is conscious economics? Most people sort of look at me funny when they hear that term, but conscious economics is about understanding the interconnection of all things. So how does race influence the way that we work and our economic systems? How does the mental health and well-being of our labor force actually also integrate into the well-being of our planet? These are the deeper questions that this platform wants to address, wants to ask. And we really believe that it's time for us to seed real systematic change. We want to be able to change our economic infrastructure to better support the balance of people, planet, profit, and art, and its integration of those things. So thank you again so much for being here. We're just off the heels of a really beautiful weekend, which was also summer solstice. And for me, I spent some time at Six Nations Reservation here in Ontario. So I took part on Saturday in a traditional fire ceremony. And I've been saying this for many years, but especially now on the heels of a global pandemic, I think it's so important that we connect with Indigenous leaders, we connect with Indigenous ceremony, and we learn how to integrate and indigenize our systems. I really, really believe in that from my heart. And with that said, I am currently hosting this event on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Now, I also want to recognize that I am a settler here, and many of us are immigrants, newcomers, either from this generation or from generations past. But I'd also like to acknowledge those who were brought here forcibly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And therefore, I'd like to honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent as well in my acknowledgement. I want to say a special thank you to my incredible team who have pulled all of this event together today. We have been through quite a challenging time as a live events organization. As you can imagine, all of our activity came to a complete halt. We absolutely lost 100% of our revenue, and I'm just so grateful to all of my team who have continued to stick with me, stick this out, know how important it is that we have platforms to have real, honest and deep conversations. So thank you to all of you. I'd also like to thank our incredible sponsors and partners who have allowed this event to come together today. Thank you to BMO, thank you to Green Shield, and of course the Economic Club as well for helping us promote this event. So with all of that said, I just want to take you through how this event is going to run today, because we have a little trick up our sleeve. We decided to do things a little bit differently here. So after our opening remarks, what's going to happen is there's going to be a link that's sent to you in the chat feature. There will also be a QR code that will come up on the screen. You can choose to either click the link or just scan the QR code with your phone, and you'll be brought to a YouTube link where we are going to watch the discussion for 30 minutes and then come back to our Zoom where we can have a Q&A with our incredible panelists. And let's just welcome those panelists quickly as they are all here. So we have Agapi Gessesse, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Young Black Professionals, C. We have Liben, Gebremikael, who's the Executive Director of TAIBU Community Health Center, and we have Alica, who is the Executive Director of the NIA Center for Arts. And not that we, didn't plan this, that each of our panelists actually represents a different sector, whether it be the arts sector, personal health and well-being, or of course our economic sector. So it's really beautiful to have this kind of conversation on this platform here of conscious economics. So with all of that said, I'm going to turn things over to an incredible force, Karlyn Percil. So Karlyn, many of you have probably seen or heard of Karlyn's work before, I know that she's been a very, very big proponent of working with corporate Canada around anti-Black racism. And so I'm going to pass the floor over to Karlyn to speak a little bit very briefly about some of the tools that her organization has developed in order to support corporate Canada as we transition and as we try and really seed this change within our system. So Karlyn, I'll pass it over to you.
Rhiannon. Oh. On me? Okay, there we go. Thank you everyone for joining us today and for having me. We had a very pivotal moment in history, and it's an opportunity for organizations to choose the right side of history. And I'm really honored to be here to remind every single group or every single leader who's on here today is that you have an opportunity to model what it looks like to create a truly equitable world and corporate culture. And that begins with a commitment from senior leaders to choose courage over comfort. And as we navigate what's coming up next, I want to implore to every single individual who is watching this, and even if you're not a people leader, a person leader, or you don't have any signing authority, I want you to take this video back to your workplace. And I want you to continue staying on that train of being uncomfortable. The work of anti-Black racism is the work of becoming a better human to all humans. And through KDPM Consulting Group, we have created a process to help organizations to begin the journey of dismantling the systemic, the institutionalized practices and policies that usually creates a culture of anti-Black racism within your organization. And systems don't dismantle themselves, people do. And the incredible leaders from C Toronto, from NIA Center, and from TAIBU, who's on here today, the first step is creating a culture of making organizations like these equity partners. And that means beginning to create a budget line item at the beginning of your budget and not at the bottom. And I'm pretty sure that you'll be hearing more of the incredible work that they've been doing. Through my company, KDPM Consulting Group, Inc., we want you to leap from performative allyship to inclusive allyship. A truly inclusive leader at the center, a key ingredient of inclusion is racial justice, is equity. So how do you leap? You start by listening and learning about the Black experience, creating space where, for example, like organizations like those who are on here today, how can you create space to put them at the forefront of the work that you are doing within the workplace culture? E stands for really embracing your entire journey and dismantling what I call white SPF. How have your white superiority, your white privilege and fragility has contributed consciously and unconsciously towards creating a culture of anti-Black racism? A stands for asking, but before you ask, you have to take action. Systems don't dismantle themselves, people do. So do the people who are responsible for upholding those systems, do they have the right training? Do they have the right knowledge? Are they aware of their unconscious racial bias? So that activity, that taking action, it begins with ensuring that the leader who's at the forefront of creating or making those changes, they are equipped with the right tools. And P stands for prioritizing equity. And like I said, I just give a quick example. How do you prioritize equity? Looking at organizations like TAIBU, like C Toronto, as equity partners. And when you prioritize that equity partnership, you put them first on your budget line and not last. So we can help you begin the journey of leaping. We know that everyone is on a different, level of the anti-Black racism training or understanding or learning, but it requires leaders to choose courage over comfort, and most importantly, to choose the right side of history. And I know here in Canada, we have the right organizations and the right leaders on this call and at large to create the change that we want to see in our society. The onus is on you, and I look forward to you doing the right thing.
Thank you so much, Karlyn. So now in the chat feature, and also there will be a split screen come up with the QR code. You can just click the link, and I'm going to invite you to watch the conversation that we pre-recorded. So it's a 30-minute conversation where I would like for you to think about the questions that you would like to ask our panelists as you're watching, and you can send in your questions directly to the host, and we will be having a moderated Q&A to follow with our incredible panelists who are all here. Hi, and welcome to the Global Institute for Conscious Economics. My name is Rhiannon Rosalind. I am a co-founder and CEO of the platform. What is conscious economics? Well, we really focus on four main pillars when we talk about building a new, more sustainable economy: the well-being of people, our planet, and the well-being of new sustainable profit models, as well as the integration of art. Today, our conversation touches on all of these themes as we sit down with Agapi Gessesse, who is Executive Director for C Center for Young Black Professionals. We're also joined with Liben Gebremikael, who's the Executive Director for TAIBU Community Health Center, and of course, Alica, Executive Director for the NIA Center for the Arts. Our conversation today is titled Unmuted: How Corporate Canada Can Support Black-led and Black-serving organizations. Why unmuted? Well, it's kind of hard to critique a system when you're operating within that system in order to do your work on the ground and to keep your organizations flowing. I think today's conversation will allow some of our leaders in this country that are serving the Black community to be able to speak more freely and openly about how we can connect and work together to create a better system for all people and stop systemic racism in its tracks. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So thank you all so much for coming and gathering with us today. I think it's such an important moment in time for us to have this conversation. Our purpose for today is really to hear from you and talk to corporate Canada and be able to create an alignment where we can understand how to better work together, how to better serve Black-led and Black-serving organizations. Mm-hmm. So I think the first place to start is with a bit of a definition, the concept of 3B. Agapi, can you tell us a little bit about the concept and how corporate Canada can use this concept when they're thinking about their strategy of supporting the community?
Yeah, I think that there's three kind of check boxes that need to happen here. One is it a Black-led organization? Meaning, is the governance, their board, are they predominantly Black? Is their leadership Black? Are most of their staff people of color as well? So Black serving, and Black focused. So if you are a Black focused organization, again, you're going to have a very clear mission in your organization that says that you're serving Black folks. And then you're also going to have possibly Afrocentric or a Black lens to the work that you're doing. So if you're teaching somebody about a particular topic, that it's coming from the lens of you being a Black person in Canada. So Black-led, Black-serving, and Black-focused. Those are three. It's very important to define that because there are organizations just by virtue of class and race going hand in hand that exist and they serve Black populations, right? But they're not coming from an Afrocentric way of knowing. They're not coming from a mandate and a leadership that really understands what's needed in this community in order for them to go from point A to point B. And I think that's really important when corporations or individuals are looking into supporting Black communities. If it's not made by us and it's not for us, then it likely doesn't have our best interest at heart.
Let's talk about this time right now because it is interesting on the backdrop of COVID and what is now, a great recession of our time. I wanted to talk about 3B organizations and how they have traditionally been impacted by an economic downturn. What is on your minds and hearts right now as you worry about the work that you do and how you'll be able to support the work that you do?
So in a situation or an environment where the economy is not doing well, two things happen. One is the capacity of the organization might be further impacted by that recession. But most importantly, the needs of the community is going to be further impacted. That means we would have more needs coming up because of unemployment, poverty, all those kind of other issues that may come, stress, mental health. And that's a challenge because then to reorganize the services within that sector when the economy is going to recover is like recreating something fresh. And number one, that would require more resources than if it was at least supported during the time, but also the disappearance of that sector is going to further impact how communities are going to survive or access services or be supported.
What is the state of the not-for-profit and charitable sector right now? How sustainable is the model, the way that it stands right now?
It's quite challenging for organizations to be able to sustain their operations in sort of even a traditional, thriving economy, because there's always these pressures of being able to have to find funding to support both your operations as well as your programming. And so we see that folks are struggling with, applying for grants at the government level, also trying to secure some revenue from perhaps your own economic activities, whether it's, having a sort of social enterprise in some ways, but then that can serve to actually impede your ability to keep that money because, either the government or some of your funders look at the fact that you're able to bring in money and they're like, well, you're bringing in your own money, so we need to reduce our funding, or that's actually not allowed. So the sustainability of the sector is really, I think that model is put into question when organizations aren't able to create diverse streams of revenue in order to keep things going and are constantly, just struggling to keep the lights on.
Canadians pride themselves on, our healthcare system. And so we don't really talk about systemic racism that is embedded within the system. I'd love for you, Liben, to talk a little bit about the work of TAIBU and why this is so critical to ending systemic racism.
Particularly if you look at the Black community, there are some very disturbing stats that show that we are at the bottom of any kind of measurement around health and social well-being. If you look at chronic disease, diabetes, the Black community is probably 3 to 4 times at greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to other racialized group, but the predominant white society. Mental health, we are overrepresented in mental health institutions, and particularly in forensic mental health departments. If you look at access to services, we are not accessing services at the right time, in the right way. Another example is with youth, particularly, they don't access mental health services through normal pathways around primary care. They go through the criminal justice system, and once you are in that system, you are in a revolving door of criminal justice, mental institution, criminal justice, mental institution. So there are some very basic kind of challenges and barriers that the Black community faces, and the establishment of TAIBU was to address those barriers by providing, just like what Agapi was saying earlier on, in terms of the culturally focused and services that are based on lived experiences of Black communities. Healthcare system has used certain experiences to further stigmatize and criminalize, or even kill Black communities with research studies and things like that. So the community does not trust the healthcare system, whether it's the healthcare professional or the hospital or the institution. It's not a situation that has happened now. It's generation over generation. It's very systemic. And so changes should not just happen in lifestyle modification with individuals. Changes should also happen with institutions, policies, and practices.
I think that it's important that when corporate Canada is thinking about what kinds of organizations and where they want to put their dollars and their resources, that we have to broaden the scope. I think a lot of the times it's easy to think about education, of course, comes up, and serving young people, of course, comes up, but there's some intricacies to particular areas like healthcare that I don't think are always thought of at the forefront. And I'm appreciating that you're being able to articulate just how much that impacts the system.
No one who is not Black can even imagine what goes through a Black person's mind and how race is at the forefront of every interaction and everything that we do. And so the work that we do at C, often people would refer to us as an employment agency, and that is not what we are. We are not an employment agency. We just know that employment is the tool to reach our mission, which is that young people will be able to become financially stable enough to provide for their families and in turn their communities, and that they'll be able to contribute to the Canadian economy just like any other Canadian would, and that they have good quality of life. We recognize that this country has a very large labor gap. We've identified 5 major labor gaps in the Canadian market that in the next 10 years, if these are not filled, those industries are going to be in trouble, right? So that's entertainment, trade, social services, hospitality, and entertainment. And we acknowledge that we do not have a people gap in this country. And I think a lot of the time, because communities who have traditionally had access, those communities are running out of people. Right? Because all of those communities are the ones who can't find anyone. But we don't have a people gap. We have a skill gap. In our community, we have a skill gap. And so what we do is we train young people to be able to take advantage of where those labor gaps are in the Canadian economy, so that they can then, access really great healthcare and be able to, express themselves through art and enjoy what other Canadians take for granted. But I think that corporate Canada at the same time has an obligation to give space for those people to be able to say, like, I don't have to behave like so-and-so, because that's what diversity is. I think we are very confused as a country as to what diversity and inclusion really means. It's not, oh, there's a Black person on my board. Yep.
Right. That's diversity. That's not inclusion.
It's not inclusion.
Yeah.
And, even as we give the definition of Black-led, Black serving, like, it's also not a check. You gotta have a conversation with the leadership there. You have to dig and you have to ask questions if you're really invested in our communities. My mother would always tell me, do you want to be the best of the best, or do you want to be the best of the worst? Because as a Black person in this country, you're going to need to be the best of the best all the time. You can never fall short of that mark. And I think that's a skill that most Black people have. That mentality, like, I have to be great. I have to be able to strive and outshine everyone else. And I think that type of resilience and innovation and always trying to secure your spot is actually a trait that corporate Canada should be taking advantage of. Like, that's something that is innately in our community, that if you don't allow people to bring their entire self to the work, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of that. And that's not equity and inclusion.
It sounds ideal, but unfortunately, I know that it's just, we don't have an environment within corporate Canada where that exists. Can you talk a little bit about the center, but also talk about why art helps to create and instill identity in Black young people, so that they can go and be themselves and know what that means to be themselves in a space where we've always had to melt or change or shift? What does that really look like?
I mean, I think art is a really important tool in the fight against anti-Black racism, particularly because art moves us, right? We can all think of a book, a TV show, a movie that transported us or built our understanding of experiences that are different than our own. And so art becomes this ability to help us all better understand who we are as individuals, and as well other people in our communities. And so NIA Center for the Arts was born out of the recognition that Black artists in this country are, excellent in many fields, whether it's writing, music. Our, 2 greatest musical exports in this past decade are from the Black community, Drake and The Weeknd. Amazing writers. Essie Egan, won the Literary Book Award for Excellence this year. And so there's all these examples of us being great, but you can't experience art from the Black community except for during Black History Month, and in select ways, And so given that Toronto is home to the largest Black diaspora, it's important for us to have a space that we can regularly find narratives, experiences that reflect our unique identities. And what I found in my work over the past decade is that Black artists have been historically underfunded and undersupported. And so when we think about the role that our photo albums play in our families, we hold our personal histories, but galleries and museums, they hold our collective histories. And we don't find Black art represented, and objects that are associated with their culture represented in these spaces. And so it leaves this gaping hole in our national identity and our ability to understand the experiences of Black Canadians. So NIA Center was born to be able to both showcase, promote, and support art from Black Canadians. We're now embarking on our most ambitious work yet, and that's to transform our space, 14,000 square feet, into Canada's first professional multidisciplinary center that's dedicated to Black Canadians, artists, and their work.
It's beautiful work, and I applaud you for it. I'm cheering for you and the build of this. I want to talk about, all of you have had really great experience in working with government, in working with corporations in order to try and advance the work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. Can we talk really honestly about what is not working in that process with corporate Canada? What are some of the key things that you have run into that just don't work or serve in the way that you need?
I think one of the issues I've found is that, right off the bat, when we come in and work with corporations, is that they want us to do this kind of work for free. It becomes a Black History Month celebration. Let's bring in some artists. Let's have folks, sing, put up their artwork. And this is great exposure for them. They're getting exposed to a new audience. Mm-hmm. There's no other industry in which you ask people to create, to produce something for free. Mm-hmm. And so it's always baffles me that, folks are approaching us wanting to, work together and partner, but are unwilling to, pay artists an appropriate and fair compensation mm-hmm. for their time and really the work that it takes to both produce the piece, transport it to your office, come and talk about it, and then go home for just exposure. And I think the other sort of missed opportunity that I try and advocate for is around education, right? We have such a short window usually to talk about these issues, usually reduced to February, the coldest and shortest month in our time, in our calendar year. And, the conversation has to go beyond just let's put up some artwork and instead move into how can we talk about this piece in relation to the Black Canadian experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that corporations can be an important site for us to advance a conversation around race that moves beyond, there are Black Canadians and, in Toronto in particular, right? And help us better understand what is the context in which Black Canadians came to this country. We have a long history of being here, hundreds of years, in fact. We have diverse experiences. We are one of the most diverse diasporas, I think, in the world. We have folks who are from the Caribbean, East Africa, West Africa, who speak different languages, are of different sexual orientations, different religions. And so we have this rich cultural fabric and legacy just within, the Black community mm-hmm. alone. How do we better understand what that looks like here? And what is the experience of, our Black colleagues in the space that we're in and in the broader city and community that we live in? And that disconnect, I think, is something that we work to close in the partnerships that we've established, but is one that I'd like to see more of.
We have to look at the big system, and corporate Canada and foundations have significant roles to play. Mm-hmm. They have the resources, they have the knowledge, they can open doors for people to come in and do stuff, right? Whether they're artists to be exposed to opportunities, and for the system to also themselves be exposed to some of the skills and talents that they have, right?
In order for us to see change in our community, we need to take a person-centered. What are your barriers? Okay, we're with you. We're going to break down those barriers together. We're providing you with the hammer, and we're just going to make sure you can kick it down. And if not, we're here with the second hammer, mm-hmm. And I think that when corporate Canada or when folks reach out to us and then they're kind of just oh, well, that doesn't necessarily fit into, whatever it is that folks are looking for. And I think that, it won't fit into a box that a corporation has created as a mandate, or because you have not taken time to get to know our community and our needs. Mm-hmm. We have, 8 years of experience. We have a 92% retention rate. 92% of the people who walk through our doors end up in employment, and our mission, and we're starting to see our mission come to fruition. That doesn't come with, us arbitrarily being oh, well, let's just run a program and right. see you later, right? And so I think it's important that there needs to be a place of learning.
And it's not easy. Most of the time, the organization that's, being partnered with doesn't have the same resources and capacity as the corporation, but is expected to meet in the middle, and that just isn't possible for so many.
No. And I think there's ways in which you could do that, because at C we have done that in a really successful way that I think we, are proud of that partnership. Is like in our IT sector, we partner, one of our streams is called Industry Led, and we partnered with Spin VFX, and we said, what are your skill gaps in your organization that you need people like to be skilled up in?
I see that as, you being in the leadership position, you being at the table, understanding the community. And I think that that's really valuable for corporate Canada to hear. And in this time, I think there's a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot of shame right now. People are worried, scared. I know so many organizations are trying to do their best within a system that is flawed. And again, there's so many good people in so many places. And I think a lot of the time what we see is when we think about diversity and inclusion, and especially diversity and inclusion offices or areas of an organization, you see a lot of good people that are maybe even community people that are there. But the expectation on those community people to solve it, fix it, also is a barrier within the system. And I have spoken to many people within corporate Canada that are, Black leaders within corporate Canada, that all that pressure to change a system above them that is not possible to change overnight or because one person is there with an understanding.
The only relationship that we've had with corporate Canada has always been supported by a Black employee, right? So when Liben talks about the community level or the knowledge level being at sort of a front line or sort of lower level, employee, that tends to be the case. They tend to have a relationship with us. But in the C-suite, at the executive level, at the board level, you don't see that same understanding, awareness, or interest. Right. And so it's very difficult for us to build relationships with corporate Canada on a long-term basis, in a strategic way, in a collaborative way, in a way that can move the needle on these issues, because we don't have the buy-in truly from the organization. We have the buy-in from a supportive Black employee who understands the need to connect to community and has a desire to make a difference, as opposed to the entire, organization coming and saying, we're part of this Canadian ecosystem. We recognize that racism is an issue. We recognize that, the Black community is not well served by, either our organization or, the broader society, and we want to make a difference. And that's the kind of partnership that we need to see in the kind of statement and commitment. And we started to, be able to see that with, Blackout Tuesday and, these solidarity statements. But it does need to go much further than that, because we've never seen it. How do you deepen your relationship with the Black community? How do you deepen your own organizational understanding of how anti-Black racism manifests in your organization? And then you're in a better position to have these conversations with community partners to develop strategic initiatives or invest in strategic initiatives that move the dial.
One of the things is you need to put some of the commitments you're going to make in that statement, not just denouncing what's happening and saying we are allies, but we are going to demonstrate our allyship to this cause by doing A, B, and C internally as an organization. So that now got us into some conversation as to identifying certain projects that we can get involved with to support them to develop that so that they can make some changes. It could be an HR situation, it could be a project that they're working on that needs to now have a different lens because it's not addressing the issue of anti-Black racism.
I like how you say that, how you say it's, when you put a statement outside or when you're giving funding, it's outside, but what is happening
inside?
within?
And that is the long-term change that we want, right? Yes. We are not expected to change. I mean, one Indigenous elder said this once, and it's going to stay with me forever, right? We didn't oppress ourselves, right? We didn't colonize ourselves. Right. So the change cannot happen always with us. I mean, it's good. We're happy to go to corporations and start the engagement, as you were just saying. But I think that the change happens within, and we're okay also to work with corporations. The financial donation and support is great, but we don't want it to be a one-off thing just at this time. We want the systems to change so that we have now better opportunities for young people to access employment opportunities and build their skills. And corporate Canada will benefit because now they'll have, people who are bringing those skills into the corporations, into the economy, right? With the same thing with education, the same thing with arts, right? So we are ready to work. We don't mind going to corporations and engaging the conversation. We just need for that interaction and for that willingness to do that, whether it's through financial resources, whether it's through capacity building and exchange of capacity, because communities have capacity, corporations have capacity. We can work together to make our society even better. I mean, Canada is a good place to be. It could be even better.
Of course, we need look no further than your community or our Indigenous communities across this country that are suffering and still even don't have basic infrastructure access to clean water. I mean, how can a prosperous nation have people within the borders of that country, the first peoples of this country, to not have those accesses, but to still have that conversation? It's time for us to not be so polite. Is that true?
I think we need to stop. I think it's not even a politeness. I think it's a naivety. You don't know what you don't know. And so something that's not part of your reality, you're never going to really think about. If I'm somebody who doesn't know how to cook, like I'm not going to know how to measure. I'm not going to know how long I need to bake something, because that's just, I order out and somebody else, handles that for me. And so that will never be something that I feel the need to learn. But I think we're in a moment now where, I often have been saying this during this time, is that we can't unhear and we can't unsee. So what are you going to do about that? I think the problem that the rest of the world outside of our communities does not understand is this is a 365 for the last couple centuries of work. We didn't wake up and say, we really have to address anti-Black racism today. We have been doing this work for a very long time. Our communities have been in crisis for a very long time. All of these kind of critiques around protests and et cetera, it's all coming from a place where people think that this just showed up. It didn't just show up. Now it's everybody's problem. Everyone's enraged and some people are upset around protests. And it's just that type of turmoil, that type of urgency, that type of anger has been stewing in our communities for years. Yes. Look at what we've done to Indigenous communities. We literally have come into this land, stolen it. They're still fighting for clean water. People want to give to wells in Africa. Look in your own backyard, because you have Indigenous people right now, this second in 2020, who don't have clean drinking water because our government and the powers that be do not value the lives of Indigenous people. And I think if you solve the problems of Indigenous and Black communities, because both of our communities are the most disproportionately affected by anything that happens on a regular day, let alone a whole pandemic, right? If you solve the problems of Black and Indigenous communities, you automatically solve the problems for everyone else.
I know that there is so much value and resource in what the communities, like the Indigenous and Black communities, have and know about mental health, about injustice, about expression, art, all of these pieces that can be lent to the larger challenges that corporate Canada face right now from an economic perspective. I'd like to end with just asking each of you, if you can, knowing that corporate Canada is listening right now, what is one thing, one piece of advice or one action step that you would like to see happen?
We are ready. We have been ready for a very long time as a community and as a generation. And I'm hoping that, corporate Canada can see this as not just something that they can do for a community, but they're doing it for everybody. We are part of that problem and we are also part of that solution. Let's come together in this bigger circle, and that's also an African-centered principle of coming into the circle and addressing the issue together.
How are we contributing to this problem? And yes, how are we part of the solution? And that could be looking, internally at the representation of Black folks at all levels of the business. B, investing in research to better understand the experience of Black Canadians across this country and in the communities that you work in. And C, making strategic investments to close those gaps. And sitting with community, collaborating, partnering with community to address these issues in reciprocal ways is the only way that we're going to actually make sustainable and systemic change over the long term. I think this is an opportunity for us to live up to the reputation that we have across this world. And I think that can be done with exactly what Liben had said. Together, finding solutions. And I speak to my community as well when I say this. It's not necessarily a time to look back and say, but you never did, but you didn't, and this kind of blame game and this contention that it's creating. We're committed to moving forward in a new direction, in an innovative way. We're in a moment in time in history that we've never seen. And I think that as businesses are thinking about how they're going to relaunch, as a lack of a term, like relaunch out of this pandemic, and how they're going to do things differently, and some of the things that they'll keep from how they've been operating for the last couple of months, and what they'll do differently. Let this be part of that. Let this change be what moves us forward.
I know there's a lot of embarrassment, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of we haven't done enough, but that doesn't mean that you can't come now.
Yes.
And that I think the community is very receptive to, let's move forward. Let's look at this point now forward. Let's make that change. The history hasn't been exceptional.
Yeah.
So let's make it exceptional now. Let's take this time to create change now. Thank you so much for all of your time and being here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome back, everybody, and I hope that everyone was able to access and watch the video and watch the conversation. I think there were a lot of really incredible points that were brought up in the conversation, and so I'd like to start with some of the questions that have come through the chat, and I'll start with this first one, and I'll open it up to our panelists in order to answer it. So the first question that's come through is, how do we extend this conversation beyond Black History Month? So I'll leave that open to our participants, whoever wants to start off with tackling that conversation.
If I may start, because I think that's something that we have already started doing. TAIBU seems to be TAIBU seems to be very, very busy during February, because everybody wants, as we've heard on the video, some kind of an exposure. And it feels as if it is like a tick box, right? So, Black History Month, February, we've had this event and we tick a box and we move on. So in recent times, as an organization, we have made sure that when people are asking us to do a presentation or come and do an event, that we start doing something outside of February. So we ask them to schedule the event in March or in other, throughout the year, so that it's not just a one-time event that we are doing. And we've done this in several ways. For example, we partnered with a few stakeholders, and we have been part of a working group that has been implementing what we call the Black Health Experience Symposium. This was in partnership with community stakeholders and Mount Sinai Hospital, or they're called Sinai Health System now. And we deliberately started holding those events outside of February, so in March and April, so that it doesn't become a token kind of an experience or an exercise. So I think it's very important that is done. And again, with school systems, maybe they need to change to have ongoing, regular kind of exposure and information about Black history, which is a very rich history, a history of pain, but also a history of resilience. And what is happening today is because of what our forefathers and previous generation have done. So I think continuing the conversation throughout the year will be very, very important.
I think those are all really, really great pieces of advice. And I like the ongoing education, and maybe not just within our school systems, but within our corporations as well. I think that there's a lot of history that we need to focus on and to learn about if we're going to be able to understand consciously how that history plays into our systems. Okay, I have another question here. This says, if you are a Black person within your organization, how do you approach this conversation at a systems level successfully? Does anybody have any advice or feedback from that piece? Agapi?
Yeah, I think that there's a few ways, and much like to what Alica had mentioned in the video, most of the time corporate Canada is approaching organizations like ours through an employee that brings it to the attention of the organization and leadership. And so I think one of the things in the climate that we're in right now, which I've been reached out to many by many employees that work in corporations that are asking their leadership, I've seen that we've made a statement, but what more are we doing? Can I provide you with perhaps a list of organizations that I think align with the values of our corporation that you might consider giving a donation to? So I think that employees simply bringing it to the attention of leadership to say, I really feel passionate about this particular topic or this particular organization, and I think that I'm willing to do, kind of the groundwork of it and present that to you. And I think if you bring something to your leadership, most likely that would be honored.
Thank you for that. There's another question that kind of, I think, adds on to this question, and it's about going to senior leadership and explaining that there needs to be more done, and the answer coming back, well, our diversity and inclusion office is responsible for that. So I think that because we're seeing more and more that diversity and inclusion is being integrated through certain offices or mandates within organizations, a lot of organizations think that that's enough. Can we talk to what we feel about that?
I don't know if Alica has something to say, but I mean, this is something that we have designed as a way of making sure that, just like we said in the video and in other conversations too, that it's not just a one-off, an outward kind of exercise that we do, right? When this Black Lives Matter and anti-Black racism movement started, all organizations were coming out with statements, which is good. I mean, it's good that people are connecting to the issue and to the cause. But that's why, we started saying, okay, what are you going to do about what is happening in your own organization, in your own space, in your own departments? And that's why, this anti-Black racism being a systemic problem should be resolved from a systemic approach and targeting it from that end. So that's why it's very important that it's not just a department problem or it's the Equity and Inclusion Office that deals with this. It should be from the governors, the board of directors, then down. And that's why we have developed, for example, what we call the Black Governance and Leadership Project, which is part of a systems change program that we have where we want to engage and start the conversation at the top level so that they have the right lens and approach and commitment that then can transpire and translate into the other operational items, right? It starts from the top. So, most boards would say, oh, we have one Black person on our board, tick a box and say that's good. What we have as our program, which is a City of Toronto funded program, was that we want to go in and disrupt that to say, how is conversation, what is power dynamics? Are all voices equal at that board level? Are your policies have commitment around making sure that the lenses that you look through are based on equity and justice lenses? So those are the kind of places where change has to happen. Having an inclusion office, and then we talked also in the video about involving Black staff on the organization to deal with this issue, is actually further impacting the Black employees because they seem to carry the weight of solving this issue of anti-Black racism within the organization by themselves. And that is really, very difficult to even think about. So changes have to come from the board governance level. And we're happy to start that conversation with corporations where we come in and share our experience and build capacity so they can start making decisions downwards.
I would just add quickly, Liben, to Liben's points, because I think they're all fantastic, that, racism isn't just about, or addressing racism rather starts internally with the diversity and inclusion team often interfacing with staff, but it also traverses every department in a corporation. When we think about procurement and the vendors that they're working with, when we think about the community investment department and how they're, investing in community organizations, as well as sort of the internal and at the governance level as well. We know too often that the conversation around diversity is just limited to one segment of identity. And so if an organization is going to, make that commitment, it can't just rest with the D&I team. It has to extend to all levels of the organization, and often then requires expertise beyond, as Liben mentioned, Black staff to bring in, consultants or third-party auditors to help folks understand where their processes and policies are creating systemic barriers for Black businesses, Black employees, and Black communities to interface with them.
I think that that's a great point, Alica, about the third party piece. And that's why I think it was so important we heard from Karlyn in the beginning of the call, because I have heard that a lot of Black employees within corporate Canada feel this pressure, but also feel silenced. So may not feel comfortable to be able to speak up about, inherent racism that's happening within an organization. It shouldn't be their job to do it. So bringing in a third party might be able to get the conversation going in a more sustainable way. I think this is a really good conversation, question. So it says, if I can get my company to make strategic, sustainable investments, what organizations / people do you recommend that we have them reach out to? So I think this kind of goes back to 3B a little bit, Agapi, but I'm going to open it up to the panelists.
Maybe I'll just jump in and kind of speak to that piece, which I spoke about in the midst of the conversation that was pre-recorded, is really just understanding that there are organizations just by virtue of class and race going hand in hand that are going to serve the Black community. But Black and I know we're not talking about Indigenous, but Black and Indigenous people in this country have very distinct barriers that have been identified and have been acknowledged. And so it's very important that we're coming from a culturally informed lens. So when you are looking at the organizations that you're looking to invest in, us at C, we often do training for other organizations that by virtue of being in existence are serving the Black community. And we train them on how to do that in a culturally informed way, and also acknowledging that our community, every person in our community is dealing with a level of trauma. Racism and the dealing of racism on a day-to-day basis based off of the color of your skin is going to give you a level of trauma because you're consistently interacting with something outside of yourself that is causing you to feel a particular way. And so there have been studies that have proven this in the UK, that racism actually has, provides you with a level of trauma. And so we come from a trauma-informed lens, understanding that all of those traumas can be compounded with life, circumstances, poverty, economic situations, just the everyday life things that every human would deal with, but they're all compounded with this shadow of, racism on your back. And I think that organizations that are not coming from a culturally informed lens cannot effectively address that issue and the changing of people's minds and helping them unlearn what they have been told, ever since they were a child. So the 3B, checking off 3B, making sure that it's Black-led, Black serving, Black focus, says that there's an intentionality to address the systemic or the rooted kind of seeds that have been implanted in most people of color in this country.
And Agapi,
sorry, if I may say, just to answer the question a little bit more directly as well, and add to Agapi's, maybe you can start with the 3 organizations that are part of this conversation and have that conversation with them as well.
Mm-hmm. Because I do think that, there's some research that has to be done when you're thinking about supporting an organization to ensure that that organization is taking an Afrocentric approach. And Agapi, is that something that most organizations that are working through that lens would list on their website, or there would be a clear way that an organization would be able to tell that that is what's happening?
Well, most organizations that serve the Black community, it's usually in their name, in their mission. I think it's also the responsibility of corporations to reach out to the leadership of these organizations and have a conversation and see, what their if the values align, right? Just because it's a 3B organization doesn't mean it's always going to be the best fit. But I think the responsibility of the corporation is really to understand and get to know the organization, especially because it really shouldn't be an exchange of a monetary gift and then, an announcement. It really needs to be a long-term relationship that's formed. And in order for you to build a relationship, you need to reach out to folks, ask questions, get to know them, get to know the members that they serve, and maybe the challenges that they're facing, to see how your organization, can come alongside ours and move forward and see how you could help.
Thank you. I think this question is really important, so I'm going to ask it. This person says, I want to be involved in working to solve anti-racism, but I'm a white person and I feel as though I don't know where my appropriate place is to speak or to lead. Do you have any suggestions for me?
Yeah, I think that, there's folks who are working in corporations around the world who are feeling out of place and unprepared to take on these conversations. And I think the recognition of your whiteness and wondering what that means in relation to conversations of race is an important one. And particularly in your organization, wanting to elevate people who do have the experience of being racialized is important. But we also know that leaders whether you're working at the board level or the executive level, need to build their capacity to talk about race. And it's not one that everyone is comfortable doing or ready to do. And so that to me marks the beginning of your journey to build your understanding. And ultimately, I think wherever there's an opportunity to bring in, folks who are experts in racism, equity work, that's really sort of the opportunity to allow them to push these conversations forward and you to support as an ally. But you also, have an opportunity every day to take leadership around anti-Black racism, whether it's in your personal life or in the workplace, based on sort of the understanding that you have. I've been saying to folks that, racism is different than, say, cancer. None of us can make a difference on, eradicating cancer. We have to donate to causes. We have to support research. But all of us can make a difference as it relates to how racism operates in our day-to-day lives and in the institutions that we work with. But it does require us to build that personal understanding. So I think that's always the first place to start, as well as sort of, pushing that conversation in your organization.
I think that's
we need allies. So always critical to have that.
I'm going to ask one more question. During the conversation, there was a lot of talk around the need for more race-based data, and that there's a real lack of race-based data here in Canada. Is there a role that corporate Canada can play in the collection of that data if governments are not making a priority to collect it?
I guess I will. I think this also ties into allyship, much to the last question. I think that I think if we look at this as if the Black community has a problem, we all have a problem, then you'll know the burden of, and often the burden of racism is put on Black folks. And I think corporate Canada, especially when it comes to data, is fund research. Organizations like TAIBU, Community Health Center, Liben has been kind of leading the charge and collecting data around the healthcare system. Get behind these organizations and fund them to be able to run their own research. If we're waiting on, government to do that, I would much rather us be able to fund that and find our own data to start to support the work that we're doing. Because a lot of the time, data really silences facts are facts, right? And I find that this country is very shy to collect this type of data because I think we're very fearful of what the results will say. And like I said in the video, our country's looked at as like the oasis of greatness. And corporate Canada can play a very large part in data. Once we have the facts, we can find solutions. And I think if corporate Canada is willing to come alongside organizations like ours, if the capacity in your organization also is there, if you have researchers, if you have, project managers that are able to assist with this type of data collection, then we don't need to necessarily wait on government to follow suit, right? They will eventually follow suit. I don't know if Liben has something to say about this. This is really
I think this is, you've really put it very well, and there's nothing to add. But I think to stress to the point that data is really key in order to look at what we are facing as a problem, right? If you don't know what the problem is and the extent of the problem, or where the problem exists as a root cause, then you won't be able to solve the problem, because you might be investing somewhere completely where investment is not required. So I think that is very, very important. And I know there is some movement now, as you just said earlier on, that we have been able to kind of shift a little bit, and it's going to take us some time. But capacity is the issue for this to move forward. We've seen it with COVID situation, right? We knew that COVID would impact racialized communities more than any other communities, and with even the preliminary data that we've seen from public health, that is being confirmed, right? And so we would know which areas, what neighborhoods, how that we can solve, and that's the start, right? I think that's the base and the foundation. And this could be a very good opportunity to work with Corporations Canada, because it helps everybody, right? It helps the healthcare system, it helps the economic system, it helps the arts. Everybody would know where to go, where we are, and where to go from here. So that's a very good question. Thank you.
I would just say quickly, there are some examples already of strong partnerships that have generated research about the Black Canadian experience. The Black Experience Project is one of them. It was a partnership between, United Way Toronto, the YWCA, the Embryonics Institute, to do a full-scale community-based research project that looked into the experiences of over 1,500 Black Canadians. That was released earlier this year. So I think there are some good examples coming out there of corporate and public and private coming together to be able to invest in research that builds our understanding of the Black Canadian experience and the issues.
Thank you so much to everyone. Before we offer the closing remarks, I just want to let everyone know that this conversation deserves a lot of time, and it deserves to be had over many, many years and to continue to be at the forefront. So that is why we filmed the conversation beforehand. We will be sending out the link to the video to every single one of you, and we ask each of you to send it to your networks. For those that couldn't attend today, we really want to be able to drive this conversation forward. There's some really great information shared by our leaders in that video. So I implore you to send that out once you get it sent, and we'll be making it public everywhere else as well. And so now, to close things off, I do want to acknowledge BMO for being here and for really helping us to bring this conversation together. And so I'm going to pass the floor over to Dylan Kamanga, Head of Global Trading and Products for BMO Capital Markets, to offer our closing remarks. Dylan?
Sure. Thanks so much, Rhiannon. Thank you so much to your company, Global Institute for Conscious Economics. I hadn't heard of that before today, so thank you very much for putting this together and making this a priority. And can't thank the panelists enough. That was just some tremendous clarity and some tremendous insight from all three of you. Alica did say that we need allies, and so I do thank the allies that are on this call as well. We do need you to step forward and to be a part of the long-term solution. Agapi had said that, this is not new, and we know that it's a journey that many of you are now joining us on as allies. But for those of us that have been fighting this battle for a very long time, it's been something that we've been dealing with every day. And quite frankly, before the George Floyd incidents, for some reason, that has kindled interest around the world in what has been happening. But many of us were sort of resigned to the fact that there wouldn't be any change, and that we were just trying to find a way to survive within this environment of a lack of justice. But this has offered a tremendous amount of hope that many of us maybe didn't have in the past. But the panelists did mention on more than one occasion, all three, how powerful the institutional side of the bias is. And it's that coupled bias with institutional power that really makes the systemic racism so long lasting. And so Alica had said that in the past we haven't had the kind of buy-in that we need from the top. That's what you need to have long-term, lasting change. At my particular institution, we didn't have a Black Professional Network employee resource group for Canada. When our new CEO came in, he had actually been the CEO of capital markets before. He knew how important it was. When he became CEO of the bank, we partnered with him to set that up as our first, the first ERG, the first employee resource group that he set up. And to show you the power of having someone at the top stand up for a group, that went from a group that was, like I said, non-existent in Canada to now the Black Professional Network at our bank is the second largest employee resource group in the entire institution. So you need that kind of buy-in from the top to have lasting change. And in Canada, sometimes we don't think that things are as difficult here. And I love Liben in the background. He had Viola Desmond. I don't know if we mentioned that during the discussion, but Viola Desmond, 1946, she's arrested in Nova Scotia. My mother's family got to Nova Scotia in 1785. So we were here before it was Canada, but she was a Black woman arrested in 1946. And people may not know, she wasn't actually exonerated until 2010. So these were laws on the books that made it more difficult. And I like how we've looped in First Nations as well, because the difference, a lot of people face bias. There's no question about it. And we acknowledge that many different groups face bias. The difference with Black people and First Nations is that we can't escape it. We can't hide from it because of how we look. It's obvious. And so we have to continue to deal with it. There's not a way for us to avoid it. So we need systemic change. We need institutional change. And I loved a lot of the different things that the panelists said that really talked about that and use their resources. Some of the questions I thought were excellent. How do you get started? What do you do when you're in an organization? Be an ally. Reach out to the resources and experts that are out there, that some of which were on these panels today, that can help your organization move forward. The allies are extremely important. One thing that Martin Luther King said that I thought was extremely powerful, he said that the greatest obstacle to change is not extremists, but it's moderates who are more afraid of change than they are maintaining the status quo. So I would just say to all of you, please help us maintain the momentum here so that we can make this a better place to live for all Canadians. So once again, thank you very much, Rhiannon. We appreciate you guys making this a priority.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. I hope you enjoy your day. I hope you can make use of the video, share it, continue this conversation. We're so grateful to all of you, including our panelists in BMO, for your support. And we will be continuing to use our platform. I acknowledge my privilege as a white person in this country who has a platform, and I am willing to use it always. So thank you so, so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we will reconnect and talk to you all very soon.